All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Greg Jacobson. For those that don't know me, I lead the UiPath Chicago chapter. I work at Protiviti as a manager in our intelligent process automation practice. And part of what I do is solution architect, code reviews, stuff like that. So, when it comes to solution architecture, best practices, all of that. I mean, it's probably the less exciting but more important topics that I'm a huge proponent of. Right, you got to walk before you can run, and with all of the new features that UiPath's coming out with, because it feels like every day there's a new feature. It's easy to get distracted with playing around with the new features and lose kind of the fundamentals. That's why, when I do code reviews or, just helping somebody with their code, even something as simple as using the right click menu instead of keyboard shortcuts, like I'll call it out, because, these little things, they start to add up. And if you can stick to the best practices, it'll like increase your productivity and save you headaches later down the road. So that's my quick spiel and why I'm very excited to introduce Ian, if you want to take it from there.
No, sounds great. I appreciate it, Greg. Thanks for the opportunity to join everybody here today. So I'll start with a little background about myself as well, and then we'll get into some of the content shortly thereafter that. So yeah, to get things started, my name is Ian Wickline. I'm actually a senior trainer here within UiPath's Partner Enablement Division. Definitely most excited to be here. Hopefully each of you are as well. So I'm an experienced IT professional, over 20 plus years in the industry, the IT industry. In addition to my daytime role here at UiPath, I actually serve as an adjunct professor specializing in computer science, information technology, as well as business management here at a handful of the universities here in the St. Louis, Missouri area, where my home location is at. I also have a additional university back in my hometown, halfway back to Chicago. Decatur, Illinois is where I was born and raised. I actually teach a adjunct class at Millikan University, located there. So long story short, that to say, my deep-rooted passion, lies in imparting knowledge in others, witnessing, people, enhance their understanding within a given specific topic or domain as well. So that said, it's definitely a pleasure to have had the opportunity to guide each of you through our content here today. So a little bit about more just my professional career. I've got an extensive background, primarily focused in software development. To date myself a little bit, I actually started my career out on the mainframe way back in the day, and as the career progressed, I started to get into a lot of the more modern day web developments, technologies and solutions, as well as a handful of various data analytics roles as well. Guys, I got to the point in my career, I was burned out. I lost the excitement, the passion, the enthusiasm I once had for the IT industry. And fortunately, a few years ago, along came an opportunity to begin exploring the development, as you'll hear me oftentimes say, the training of UiPath-based robots. So as soon as that moment hit, the experience revitalized my excitement, the passion for the IT industry, obviously leading me to where I'm at present day today. So prior to my employment at UiPath, I actually held a position of a lead automation engineer at one of the large Catholic hospital systems here within the St. Louis metropolitan area. In my role there, I was actually accountable for the development of numerous UiPath-based automations. Took charge of solution architecture and design for many more UiPath-based automations. In addition to the design, development work, solution architecture work that I was doing, I also had the honor and privilege of designing and subsequently delivering a comprehensive 5-day training program specifically tailored to educating the new citizen developers in our departments. Think revenue, financial analysts, and even doctors and nurses how to build their first production-based grade automations. So, guys, I share all that to say that I'm drawn from the extensive professional experiences, especially the last several years, wrapped in and around UiPath-based technologies over the last several years, trying to again share a lot of those professional experiences, insights, and knowledge with each of you on our call today. So that all said, let's go ahead and kick things off and get things started. So today we're going to specifically cover several different topics as it pertains to all things UiPath Solution Architecture. So we'll start out by really just introducing, what are we talking about from a solution architecture point of view? Really that, comprehensive structured approach for, again, implementing, the RPA projects, obviously utilizing the UiPath platform. So, hopefully it's true to say, we're definitely in a rapidly evolving landscape right now. Obviously, more and more organizations, increasingly turning to RPA, and a little selfish plug for UiPath here. And obviously the whole goal behind it, they're trying to streamline, the business processes, trying to gain that competitive edge and advantage in respective industries. So, that said, obviously trying to ensure the success and scalability of automation solutions, it's crucial that we have a well-defined architecture in place. So, UiPath Solution Architecture, just kind of getting a baseline to it, this idea of it being an invaluable resource for organizations that are embarking on RPA projects, trying to enable, the different organizations to establish that strong foundation, being able to design scalable solutions, be able to streamline, the development and testing, being able to sustain the automation initiatives effectively. And then, by following that structured approach, trying to maximize the benefits of RPA and ultimately trying to drive that transformative change throughout the different business operations. And once we kind of get that baseline understanding out of the way, we'll really dive into more of a focused, in-depth conversation into a concept that we refer to as the 6 stages of an RPA project. And to kind of break these out at kind of a broad high level now, and we'll get deeper into each of these here in just a couple of moments. The enable stage, the whole idea of trying to set the stage or the foundation for our successful RPA project and RPA projects, down the road. What are some of the key activities in this stage? Trying to identify processes that are suitable for automation, trying to assess, organizational readiness, and ultimately trying to set up the actual UiPath platform, the actual technical platform. Starts to become some of the conversational points that we'll get into in the enable stage. We'll also get into talking about, just some of the importance, trying to, the importance of aligning automation objectives with business goals, and obviously trying to obtain the necessary buy-in from all the different stakeholders. Those will be some of the things that we'll get into talking about specifically into the enable stage. From a preparation stage, point of view, think about the detailed analysis and some of the initial planning that needs to go on, towards our RPA projects. Starting to think about, gathering of, the different requirements, documenting the current state of the process, identifying opportunities, we might potentially be able to improve existing, processes. The key here, trying to, understand and emphasize the significance of, scoping out a project, doing the, project estimation, bringing in the resources into thought, ultimately trying to define what success ultimately looks like for a successful project implementation down the road. Then we'll get into the design stage, ultimately where the project team starts to create the automation solution, albeit at kind of at a conceptual level at this point, but starting to draw that vision. What's that actual solution going to look like? Starting to think about what the individual process workflows, the individual XAML files in our world might start to look like. What are some of the user interface interactions ultimately going to start looking like? As well as obviously starting to get into thinking about what are those data inputs and data outputs, all different types of things that we'll get into in the design stage. One other thing that we need to also start thinking about when we start talking about the design stage is thinking about exceptions. What that exception handling is going to start looking like. The error processing, error management. What about some of the security requirements as well? These are all things that we'll get into talking about when we start getting deeper into our conversation in and around the design stage. The build stage, where the actual development of our automations takes place. We'll start talking about, what that means to the project team, as it specifically utilizes the UiPath platform. Ultimately trying to implement those design workflows back from our design stage. What's that development actually look like, and all the logic that's needed to go with it. So a little bit of what, Greg was alluding to, starting to think about those best practices, think about all the different modules that we're going to develop, the reusability of all the different components and workflows that we might have, as well as the maintainability. for being able to create that robust automation solution. So we'll get into some deeper dives and conversations in and around the build stage accordingly when we get there here in a few moments. The test stage, ultimately that, quality assurance stage, is the solutions that we've engineered and designed, is the functionality, meeting expectation. Think about all the different testing techniques that are ultimately going to be employed. We'll get into talking about some unit testing and integration testing, and probably the most important of all when we get into the test stage, the user acceptance testing that goes on into that particular stage. Ultimately trying to validate the expected outcomes, addressing any of the defects or problems or issues that might be there prior to going into production, which takes us to the final stage, the sustain stage. Again, focused here on the deployment of the automation solution. Again, ensuring that it's ongoing, it's supported appropriately, it's meeting the expectations, as we finally roll into a productionized state today, 6 months from now, a year from now. So we'll get into talking about some of the different needs from a training perspective, training the different end users, the change management that goes along with dropping in with an automation solution, all the different support documentation that's ultimately going to be needed, as well as all the different monitoring mechanisms, techniques that need to go into play once we deploy our solutions into production. And definitely we'll get into talking about that ongoing maintenance here. When we talk about that 6 month, year from now, 18 months, 2 years down the road, how do we handle those updates, manage all the different exceptions that we'll eventually stumble across, and then ultimately the be all end all, trying to optimize the overall solution performance on the back end side. So any initial comments, thoughts, questions, concerns with kind of what we've outlined as kind of the roadmap for our conversations today? Everybody A-okay?
Just quiet. And if you don't want to speak up on microphone, you can always put any questions you have in the chat as well.
Or two. Hey, good day. I appreciate that.
Huh?
All right. So let's go to baseline, and then we'll dive into the stages in more depth and detail. So again, UiPath Solution Architecture, crucial aspect, that the organization's got to consider when they get into implementing automation projects, encompassing the design, the structure, the integration of all the different components, ultimately trying to create that efficient, scalable automation solution, or I should say solutions. The key here, focusing on developing a well thought out solution architecture, organizations will hopefully be able to derive numerous benefits from their UiPath based implementations. The significance of solution architecture lies in the ability to enable successful automation implementations, the design, ultimately be able to design efficient and scalable solutions, ensuring the maintainability, the security, the compliance, trying to drive operational excellence, and obviously ultimately the digital transformation that many organizations are seeking to obtain today. So to break this down a little bit further, focusing on a handful of ideas or concepts here. This whole idea of enabling successful automation implementations. The UiPath Solution Architecture trying to play that pivotal role in ensuring the success of automation projects, trying to provide that strategic framework, all the guiding principles, trying to set that foundation for the entire automation journey. A well-defined solution architecture is going to help the organization plan, organize, and execute their automation initiatives effectively. Ultimately trying to align the automation objectives with business goals, trying to identify those potential risks, challenges, and ultimately outlining the necessary steps to overcome all those challenges. Our goal is to try to be proactive, coming up with this proactive approach, trying to minimize the chances, that a project might fail, trying to increase the likelihood of achieving the desired outcomes. Getting into designing efficient and scalable automation solutions. So efficiency and scalability are critical factors for automation solutions. UiPath Solution Architecture trying to enable organizations to design automation solutions that are optimized for performance and resource utilization. Leveraging best practices, the different design patterns, modular approaches. The architecture trying to ensure that automation components can be reused across multiple processes. The idea of reusability, not only saving developmental efforts, but also trying to promote consistency, standardization, trying to lead to an improved overall efficiency. Additionally, the architecture incorporating, the scalability considerations, allowing organizations to seamlessly expand their automation initiatives as the demand of the platform ultimately grows. Trying to ensure maintainability, security, and compliance. Huge factors that you need to take into consideration in your automation projects. And the whole idea with solution architecture, trying to emphasize these aspects to create those robust, reliable automation solutions. All about trying to promote the use of standardized practices, coding conventions, and the ultimate documentation that goes into it all. Trying to make it easier for developers and administrators to maintain and then ultimately enhance the solutions over a period of time. The whole idea with the architecture, trying to incorporate the security measures, all the different access controls that are out there, encryption, security data handling, trying to protect sensitive information, prevent the unauthorized access to, parties that should not otherwise have access to that sensitive content or information. Furthermore, getting into some of the compliance requirements, some of the data privacy regulations that are out there, different industry standards, obviously depending on the industry that you might be working within. Ultimately trying to integrate all that into the architecture and ultimately ensuring the adherence, and being able to mitigate potential risks accordingly. Second to last, driving operational excellence. The whole idea of UiPath Solution Architecture, trying to contribute to that driving of operational excellence within an organization, trying to streamline and automate repetitive type tasks, those rule-based tasks. Ultimately, the automation solution is built on the idea of a solid architecture, trying to enable employees to focus on the value-added activities and the strategic initiatives of the organization. All about trying to enhance productivity, reducing the human error, improving the overall operational efficiency of the organization. The whole idea of the architecture behind this, trying to facilitate that process optimization, providing insights into the different bottlenecks, the inefficiencies, as well as the opportunities for potential process improvements. Organizations ultimately trying to leverage all these insights to optimize the workflows, enhance customer experiences, and be all end all achieve the cost savings that are desired. And then finally, achieving digital transformation goals. Hopefully it's a true story. Everybody could probably agree in today's digital era, organizations are striving for digital transformation, trying to remain competitive and be able to adapt to the evolving market dynamics. UiPath Solution Architecture is really trying to act as an enabler for the digital transformation initiatives that are out there. Trying to leverage UiPath's automation capabilities within a well-designed architecture. Organizations hopefully have the ability then to be able to automate the end-to-end business processes, integrating disparate systems, enabling that data-driven decision-making that's needed. Ultimately trying to empower organizations to unlock new efficiencies, accelerate the innovation, delivering the enhanced customer experiences. The architecture being, that pillar behind it, ensuring that all automation solutions are aligned with that broader digital transformation strategy, trying to foster that culture of continuous improvement, innovation accordingly. So to kind of recap, UiPath Solution Architecture, essential component for the successful implementation of automation projects, trying to provide that necessary framework to design efficient, scalable, adaptable automation solutions while ensuring maintainability, security, and compliance. So by investing in a well-designed solution architecture, organizations can maximize the benefits of UiPath's automation capabilities, driving that operational excellence, and ultimately achieving their digital transformation goals. Any questions, thoughts, comments here, guys? Right, we'll keep rolling. So the 6 stages, let's start to get into kind of a broad, maybe 5,000, we did 10,000 foot view, let's get 5,000 foot view, and then we'll dive into kind of the 2,500 foot to ground level view of each individual stage here next. So kind of an easy way to break down solution architecture is to look at the 6 stages, really trying to provide that structural approach to implementing an RPA organization and environment. Ensuring, again, that organizations can effectively identify, design, build, and maintain automated processes in order to drive operational efficiency and productivity. So first and foremost, UiPath Solution Architecture, trying to enable organizations to design automation solutions that are efficient, scalable, and adaptable. So by carefully considering the processes that are suitable for automation and assessing the organization's readiness, the enable stage is all about setting that foundation for a successful project and really projects. The stage here, trying to help identify the right automation opportunities and be able to provide or prioritize them, based on their impact and their ultimate feasibility at that point. The preparation stage, talking about conducting a detailed analysis of the selected processes, trying to gather all the requirements. This particular stage is really trying to align the business goals with automation objectives, trying to ensure that the project scope, the resources, and success criteria are all clearly defined. So by investing time in thorough preparation, the idea here being that organizations can set realistic expectations, ultimately trying to avoid potential pitfalls during the implementation phase. Moving into the design stage. The design stage is crucial for creating an optimal automation solution, ultimately involving the designing of the actual process workflows, the user interface interactions, the data ins, the data outs of our automations. So by considering all the aspects, thinking of error and exception handling, error management, security requirements, the idea here being that organizations can ensure that automation solutions are developed and designed as robust as possible, and obviously in an alignment with the specific needs that have been put forth. The build stage, this is where we actually bring the UiPath platform and begin to implement the actual design workflows and the actual business logic at hand, the actual solutions, configuring the activities, creating the actual automation sequences, all of our workflows, and ultimately then that integration with all the different external systems and or applications that we're ultimately trying to automate up and against. The key here, trying to adhere to the best practices, as Greg alluded to at the very beginning of our call today. Thinking about the different modules, the idea of reusability, again, the maintainability that comes along with it. Trying to ensure that automation solution is well structured, easier to manage, easier to maintain, enhance long-term down the road. Then we switch into the test stage, crucial for validating the functionality, the reliability, the performance of the automation solution that's been built prior in the build stage. Conducting rigorous testing. The idea here being that organizations can then identify, rectify any of the defects or issues, all about trying to ensure high quality automation solutions, meeting the defined requirements have been put forth. So thorough testing, trying to help build the confidence in the solution and reducing the risk of the errors once we finally deploy into full production use. And then last but not least, the sustain stage, focusing in on the actual deployment of the automation solution into the production environment, ensuring its ongoing operation and maintenance is there, providing the necessary training, the support documentation, establishing all the monitoring mechanisms that are needed. The idea here is, organizations can then effectively manage and optimize the solution's performance over a period of time. The whole idea of ongoing maintenance here, handling updates, managing exceptions, addressing the evolving business needs, everything essential for sustaining the benefit of the entire automation solution that's been developed and designed. So UiPath Solution Architecture, critical component in achieving successful automation implementations, enabling organizations to design those efficient, scalable, adaptable automation solutions while ensuring maintainability, security, and compliance. Investing in a well-designed solution architecture, organizations able to maximize the benefits of UiPath's automation capabilities, driving the operational excellence and achieving, again, the digital transformation goals. So now let's take it down a little bit deeper on a stage-by-stage basis. So the enable stage, crucial phase again in establishing that solid foundation for the solution architecture, in the process within an organization. So during the enable stage, the organization focuses on setting up the necessary infrastructure. That's the biggie here. Thinking about all the different resources that are needed for our entire RPA, process and department organization. All the different environments that are needed to support the implementation of UiPath technologies. Ultimately trying to expand further, on the key considerations and steps here next. So when designing the server architecture for UiPath, several important factors that we need to take into consideration and into an account here. The first, scalability. It's essential that we design our architecture in such a way that we can accommodate the future growth and increased demands on our platform. To achieve scalability, we've got to employ techniques, think load balancers, clustering that are out there, distributed architecture that's out there. Through these different approaches, all about trying to distribute that workload across multiple servers, ultimately trying to ensure that efficient resource utilization, and obviously then the ability to handle the larger automation processes further down the road. This whole idea of high availability, trying to engineer a platform that's fault tolerant, crucial to minimizing downtime, ensuring uninterrupted operations of our platform. Think redundancy here. The whole idea of achieving redundancy, through different multiple servers, redundant network connections, redundance from a storage point of view, having some type of, backup system in place, trying to mitigate the impact of any type of hardware failure, and ultimately trying to maintain, continuity of our technical stack. Obviously, security is a huge factor that needs to be considered as well. Trying to protect the sensitive data, that we're ultimately processing through the infrastructure. Ensuring the privacy of information is of utmost importance. To enhance security, making sure that we set up the appropriate firewalls, the appropriate implementation of access controls, making sure that we utilize, necessary and appropriate security protocols for the different data transmissions that we'll be a part of. By adopting robust security measures, trying to safeguard against unauthorized access and potential data breaches. From a performance point of view, trying to optimize the architecture in such a way that we can deliver the high performance results that are essential for the efficient automation processing. Involving high performance servers, optimizing network configurations, implementing, the appropriate, caching mechanisms, trying to reduce as much latency as possible, trying to improve the response times. Ultimately working on fine tuning, if you will, the architecture performance, ensuring that smooth execution of all of our automation workflows. And then finally, along those lines, this whole idea of integration capabilities. The whole idea of UiPath needing to interact with databases, APIs, or other enterprise systems or platforms. It's crucial that we consider that integration requirements, and ensuring that the architecture supports seamless integration data exchange across all those different platforms. This might involve designing appropriate connectors, establishing secure communication channels, and ensuring the compatibility with the different target systems that might ultimately be needed. So once we have the server architecture design, the next step we need to think about is the installation and configuring of the necessary components. So several of the key things that we need to think about here, obviously server provisioning, making sure here that we've got and set up, the required physical or virtual servers based on the architecture design that's been selected. Install the operating system, configuring the network, settings appropriately, and obviously providing a stable foundation for the UiPath infrastructure. Setting up our different databases. One of the key things from a UiPath orchestrator perspective is a Microsoft SQL Server. Making sure that we follow the specific instructions, directions, guidance, making sure, with the appropriate database system, ensuring again that reliable, well-performing database environments, appropriately configured and set up. The actual installation of orchestrator, making sure that, with the installation and configuring of UiPath orchestrator, and then its designated servers, involving running the actual installer, specifying the different database connection details, configuring the different various settings, email notifications, some of the SSL certificates, some of the user authentication, and hopefully everybody's pretty well in tune. Orchestrator really being that, being the central, control points for managing all of our, automation processes. The robot installations, the robots on the actual machines that'll execute the actual automation workflows. Make sure that you get the robots properly configured to connect to Orchestrator. Specifying the correct orchestrator URL, the appropriate authentication details, etc. Robots obviously acting as execution agents for automation tasks. The licensing and the activation from that perspective. Making sure that we provide the necessary license keys, and activating them appropriately through Orchestrator. Ultimately ensuring, that the organization's got the legal access that's needed and ultimately required to access the different UiPath functionalities. And then one of the last items to think about here, establishing separate, dev, test, and production environments. So now that we've got the technical stack out of the way, start thinking about, what that dev, test, and production, platform is ultimately going to look like. So obviously, setting up a dev environment, creating that, dedicated environment for development purposes, where the developers got the ability to create, test, debug their automation workflows. The environment here being isolated from production. Make sure that we're not going to have any disruptions by making accidental mistakes in our development environments. The key here is giving the developers the ability to have their own individual machines with Studio and ultimately UiPath Assistant installed, allowing them to work on, the development of their different automation projects. Then we move to test, another separate environment closely resembling production in the terms of an infrastructure and the necessary configurations. The whole idea, including Orchestrator, the robots, the different relevant components, making sure that we've got a controlled space for testing and validating automation workflows before we ultimately deploy them into production. Which takes us to production, that configuring of the production environment. Everything's been finalized, tested. This is where the automation will effectively, run, execute from a day-to-day normal operations, point of view. Carefully managed environments. Access should be very restricted to only the necessary authorized personnel. Have dedicated production servers, highly available, scalable architecture needs to be, brought into consideration here. Appropriate security measures definitely need to be taken into account. Again, production environment where the automated processes perform their actual intended processing. As you start to think about how do we move from dev to test to prod, you need to establish a process accordingly for that promotion of the workflows from dev to test to prod. Involve some type of version control system is kind of what comes to mind here. Some type of release management process, change management process starts coming into mind here. Ensuring that controlled and well-documented workflow promotion process, all about trying to maintain, again, consistency and reliability across all of our environments. So by following all these steps, the key here is the organization can really establish a well-structured infrastructure setup with separate environments for developing, testing, and ultimately deploying solutions into a production mode or state. Trying to enable efficient collaboration amongst the development teams, rigorous testing, and ultimately that smooth deployment of that finalized processes again into our production environments.
Hey, Ian, you've got some questions in the chat. One of
Sure.
them, do you have tools to recommend for each step of the solution design process?
Oh man, there's all kinds of options. It's with the time we've got, it'd be hard to get into the weeds of them all, but within the UiPath, ecosystem, we've got all kinds of different, tools that you could potentially consider bringing to the table. So, but it's what I always recommend folks, maybe to keep it really simple, is find something that works effectively for you and your team. Like I said, UiPath's got a handful, but even broader than that, just kind of the industry, there's all kinds of tools that are out there. Find something that works for you and the team. Don't let this be a self-centered decision either, though. Allow this to be something that you and the multiple folks on the team can collaborate on and find something that works efficiently and robust for you and the team.
Thank you. And then Tracy asks, whose responsibility is it to document test cases, especially in the case of a production environment? Oh, sorry, that got sent in the middle of while I was talking. Especially in the case of a non-sophisticated and/or non-technical client. I guess I can kind of take a crack at this too.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of a joint effort. I mean, this is mostly for folks in consulting where, we are working with a client, but in a perfect world, the client knows their data inside and out and can build test cases to kind of cover every logical path. But that's the perfect scenario is never really the reality, right? So in my experience, it's you kind of have to guide the client by, I'll provide a few examples like, okay, here are a couple of different scenarios that can possibly happen during this bot process, and we want to make sure that we're covered through those logical paths so we can test those individual branches of logic. And usually once you provide, like I'll provide them an Excel file with a list of a couple and say, can you just add to this? So that gives them an idea of what we're looking for. So I don't know if you want to add anything on to that.
Yeah, what I always try to think about, especially in the context of solution architecture, your solution architect conceptually, take it, kind of, loosely, as I say it this way. Your solution architect, in theory, should be able to sit down and do the job that's being automated manually themselves. They're deeply ingrained in the business process. Essentially, whoever's asking, for the automation to be built, they need to be able to train or teach a solution architect how to actually do the manual task at hand. And the idea there being is obviously business, whoever's asking for the automation to be built, rightfully should be the one accountable for putting the test cases together, because again, they know the business process at hand, what they want automated. But since a solution architect has been trained and brought up to speed on what that process is, essentially to the point they, in theory, could perform the work themselves, that allows the solution architect to plug in all the gaps that business may not potentially have brought to the table. So it's to Greg's point, it's a collaborative effort between the actual requester as well as the solution architect on the opposite side of the coin. So, but if you, the solution architect, don't get brought up to speed on understanding the ins and outs of the actual business process, you'll never be able to fill in those gaps. And those gaps are going to lead their way or bleed their way into the production build at that point, which is just going to lead into the old proverbial wheel that we're constantly spinning all the time. We're constantly maintaining, going back to the drawing board, putting in the enhancements. With the be all end all goal is you're trying to deploy that pristine solution one time into production and hopefully allow it for the most part to be self-sufficient, so we can move on to the next solution closely behind that.
Right. And if you just kind of tell a client, hey, we need test cases without providing anything for them to work off of, chances are you're never getting that back, and they'll just put it off because they don't know where to begin. There's one more question before we jump into the preparation. How can we make sure we use our resources, IaaS, SaaS, PaaS, on-premise, wisely when it comes to enabling all those different dev, test, and production environments, given time, cost, etc.? I would say make sure you loop in the SMEs, and rather than doing email chains, it's better to just kind of get everyone, all the subject matter experts on a call who are intimately familiar with the infrastructure side. And then a lot of time you can let them hash it out if you're less technical. But that's kind of the most efficient way of doing that.
Yeah, one of the things I always think about, especially when you start getting into production, think about how critical are your automations to the business and the day-to-day grind. It's tricky to try to articulate here on a broad call like this, but if you've got a business process that's there's not mission critical processing involved, you probably don't need a super sophisticated production environment at that point. If an automation doesn't run for a day, a week, a couple of weeks, what's the negative ramification on the business? And if it's minor, you don't need this really sophisticated, elaborate environment. But now if you got that mission critical automation, if we're down for an hour and that automation can't run, that's where this idea of redundancy and the robustness of the technical stack becomes critically important at that point. So it's you got to think of it as a kind of a continuum. Don't think you've got to have this huge sophisticated deployment if it's not necessarily needed. But then with that also said, be ready to scale it though. You know, if all of a sudden you drop that, critical automation onto the stack, business is finally, growing to accept and adopt the platform, be able to scale it at that point and be able to grow, into a much more robust, maintainable, fault tolerant type system at that point. All right, let's dig, guys. We got 20 minutes and we got quite a bit of content to get through here. So preparation stage, the whole idea here, bringing in project governance, several key activities kind of lay the groundwork for, our successful, efficient automation project. So expanding on each of these a little bit more. So this whole idea of agreeing on the project development approach, spending some time understanding and establishing, that centralized, consistent framework for executing the actual automation project. Define the guidelines, the standards, how the project to be managed, developed, and ultimately delivered. This is where we start thinking about project management methodologies, agile, waterfall, assigning the key roles, responsibilities to the different team members, coming up with the communication strategies, our collaboration, protocols, making sure that we've got effective coordination amongst all the different stakeholders. Thinking about the project timelines. This is where we need to establish the agreement, expectations, the different project milestones, the different deliverables that are going to be out there. So by aligning on all the different, project development approaches, the idea here that all the team members can gain that clear understanding of their responsibilities, ensuring the efficient collaboration, risk management, ultimately trying to, have that successful project outcome and the be all end all. This is where we begin to establish RPA best practices, that set of guidelines or recommendations trying to promote the effective implementation of our automation projects. Trying to encompass various aspects of our deployment, different design principles, coding standards, error handling, security measures, version control, deployment strategies, all that kind of gets wrapped up and rolled into this idea of RPA best practices. Being able to review and follow those best practices. Project governance teams can ensure that the development team adheres to industry level recognized standards and leverages, proven methodologies. Trying to ultimately minimize technical debt, enhancing maintainability, facilitating the knowledge sharing and collaboration amongst all the developers and ultimately team members. Regularly update your best practices, obviously based on, evolving industry trends or emerging technology. All that important to stay aligned with the latest advancements in the whole RPA segments. Set up process pipelines. The process pipeline analysis, evaluating, optimizing, in the sequence of processes, in our automation project. Objectives here, trying to, identify potential bottlenecks, the different dependencies, areas for improvement within our process pipeline. That process pipeline really trying to talk about the flow of activities and, and the tasks that RPA bots follow to complete, a specific automation process. Through all the different analysis, project governance teams trying to assess the, efficiency and effectiveness of each process, examining all the dependencies, resource allocation, and different automation opportunities. So by identifying all the optimization opportunities, streamlining our process pipeline, the whole idea here being that the team can enhance the overall efficiency of the entire automation project, minimizing delays, optimizing our resource utilization. This analysis trying to ensure that, our bots operate smoothly and seamlessly within the defined pipeline. Again, all about trying to lead to the improved automation outcomes. This idea of process walkthroughs, this interactive session where the project team and the stakeholders actually sit down and review and validate the automated processes before we effectively move to deployment. The dev team trying to present, the automation workflows, providing that step-by-step demonstration of how the processes will ultimately be executed via, robots actions. The purpose of a process walkthrough, trying to gather the feedback, ensuring that the automation processes, accurately reflect the desired business outcome, trying to address any potential concerns or issues by our stakeholders at that point. In these sessions, allowing the stakeholders to try to visualize or understand, how this automation is ultimately going to impact their day-to-day operations. be able to provide that opportunity to make necessary adjustments, enhancements, tweaks, improvements before that final deployment ultimately comes to fruition. So the idea of process walkthroughs, all about promoting transparency, collaboration, and stakeholder engagement, trying to, again, align those expectations, ensuring that the automation processes are going to meet the defined requirements and objectives. So, the whole idea here, project, governance, the preparation stage, agreeing on the development approach, reviewing RPA best practices, conducting those, process pipeline analysis, facilitating, process walkthroughs, trying to provide that solid foundation for successful automation implementation, the effective and efficient collaboration, and our continuous improvement of all of our RPA initiatives. Taking us into the design stage, probably in the world of solution architecture of all of them, if there is one, the most important of all of them. This is where automation solutions, begin to focus on creating a comprehensive solution architecture that outlines the structure, the components, the integration points of this automation solution that we're ultimately putting together. This stage involves designing of the actual workflows, not building them, but designing them. Designing, and defining the specific roles and responsibilities for each component. Identifying the data flows, all the different dependencies that the automation ultimately is going to have. And the design stage focused in on encompassing and defining that air handling mechanism, security considerations, as well as some of the scalability requirements that come along with it. Specifically, one of the most important documents that you'll ever stumble across, the process design document, or the PDD. Crucial artifact in the development process, providing that detailed description of the automation process. So when filling out the PDD, important to provide that comprehensive and clear overview of the actual business process at hand. So things to think about here, that process overview, providing that overview of the process, including what's the purpose and the objectives of this process? Explaining the context in which the automation is ultimately going to be implemented. That trying to highlight, if you will, the key stakeholders and or dependencies at that point. All the individual process steps, breaking down that larger process into the sequential steps. Being able to clearly outline each action and decision point along the way. Understanding all the inputs and outputs to each step. Ensuring that complete understanding of the entire end-to-end process flow. Something that easily gets lost in a PDD, so be careful here. It's important to ensure that we also include into the PDD exception handling. The potential exceptions or error scenarios that may arise during the automation. Make sure that those are clearly documented. And more importantly, I should say, the specific actions or the alternative paths that should be taken when these scenarios occur. Making sure that our automation can handle those, the process can handle those various situations when and where they do occur. Some of the actual business rules at that point, the actual business rules or logic needs to be clearly defined inside the PDD. Trying to help the developer to understand the decision-making process so they ultimately can implement the rules accurately in the actual, developed solution at that point. And inside the PDD, kind of lastly, all the different data requirements, all the different input data sources and formats required for automation. Being able to define any of the transformations or validations that might be needed and applied to that data during our process. This next one throws a lot of people for a loop. We're in design, but we're talking about creating test cases. Yes, we do that here. And the idea being of creating our test cases inside the development process to ensure the automation solution functions as intended. Test cases trying to validate the expected behavior of the process, helping to identify all the defects or issues. Then we get into the solution design document, trying to provide that in-depth explanation of the actual technical design and architecture of the automation solution. That blueprint that developers are ultimately going to take to implement the automation effectively. And once we get both those documents put together, we'll get into a PDD or SDD sign-off. Essentially a formal sign-off where we take the stakeholders, making sure that everybody's in alignment and agreement with the proposed design, the functionality of the automation solution at that point. That sign-off signifying mutual agreement, understanding between both parties business are, the requester and the RPA team, making sure that everything's approved, the documented approach is in mutual agreements. So it's important to remember, sign-off process is obviously going to vary depending on organizations, specific procedures, project governance. It's essential to follow, the company guidelines, obtaining the necessary approvals before proceeding with the developments and subsequent implementation of the different automation solutions that we're going to bring to the table. Finally, we get into the build stage. Inside being the crucial phase where the actual development of the workflows takes place. Essentially involves building out the actual workflows, getting into actually performing the unit and functional testing. Why do we do the testing and design right here? We finally can get into that unit and functional level testing as part of the build here. Ultimately, creating what we refer to as the development specification document on the back end side of it all. So obviously the biggie here, building out the workflows, the core activity of the build stage. Obviously designing and developing the actual automation processes inside of UiPath Studio. Obviously our IDE within the world of UiPath. Once we get the solution built, that's when we can then get into performing unit and functional level testing, ensuring the quality and reliability of the developed workflows. Trying to identify and fix as many defects or issues before we move into the next stages, especially test. And then on the opposite side, the idea of creating the development specification document, a comprehensive document really trying to serve as a reference for the developed automated, or I should say automation solution. Trying to provide detailed information about the design, the functionality, and the actual implementation of the workflows. The DSD, as it's typically stated for short, trying to serve as a comprehensive reference for developers, the testers, and other stakeholders involved in the automation solution. Trying to really bring the clarity, consistency, and documentation of the actual developed workflows at that point. Trying to facilitate easier maintenance, troubleshooting, and obviously when we get into future enhancements later on down the road. So the build stage of UiPath Solution Architecture, critical phase where the actual development of the workflows takes place, involves building out the workflows inside Studio, performing again the unit functional testing, and ultimately then creating the development specification document on the backend side. Again, that comprehensive reference document of the actual final developed automation solution. So again, crucial step or stage in the end-to-end solution architecture, all about trying to ensure successful implementation of our automation processes, ultimately laying the foundation for the subsequent stages, such as our deployment, testing, and maintenance stages ahead. So from a solution architecture perspective, the testing stage, crucial stage focused here on validating that the developed solution up and against the defined requirements and ultimately the expected outcomes. Involving here testing activities such as unit integration testing, and most importantly here, user acceptance testing, as well as getting into some of the performance testing here. The goal, ensuring that the automation solution functions as intended, handling exceptions properly, meeting the desired performance benchmarks on the opposite side. The big takeaway here, you get into what we refer to as the go and no-go decision, a critical milestone in our quality assurance process, determining whether the UI automation is ready for deployment or not. Or do we need to go back and do some further testing, improvements, etc. So careful considering execution of test cases, reporting results, making that go, no-go decision. Organizations here can ensure the successful implementation and deployment of the high quality UiPath-based automations. So all these steps here, trying to contribute to building the reliable, efficient solutions that meet the defined requirements and ultimately deliver the value to the stakeholders that are involved. And then last but not least, we get into the sustain stage where we focus on the deployment of the actual automation solution into production and ultimately trying to ensure its ongoing operation and long-term maintenance. This stage focused in on activities such as version control, release management, monitoring, and support. So all the different regular updates, the enhancements that are needed to adapt the solution to the different ongoing and changing business needs, as well as obviously some of the continuous improvement efforts trying to optimize performance scalability, and reliability. The UiPath hypercare is typically a term that you might hear, a term used to describe that post-implementation phase of UiPath-based automations, in the different projects that we deploy, all about playing that crucial role in sustaining, our solution. So to kind of bring things to a closure, I'm watching my clock here and it's flying by on me. We got about 4 minutes. So to kind of wrap everything here, the whole idea, again, with UiPath Solution Architecture, that whole idea of, consisting of our 6 stages: enable, preparation, design, build, test, and sustain. Each playing obviously a very, vital and unique role in ensuring that success of our project, and ultimate, all the, development of that efficient, reliable automation solution at the end. So by following the stages, obviously trying to ensure that structured, systematic approach to UiPath-based solution architecture, resolving in the development of robust, scalable, maintainable automation solutions, adhering to the framework, the key here where organizations can successfully implement RPA projects, be able to achieve their automation goals, ultimately the be-all end-all, leading to the development of robust, scalable, maintainable automation solutions. So that all said, hopefully by embracing this systematic approach of UiPath Solution Architecture, you guys will be well on your way to harnessing the full power of UiPath to revolutionize your organization's operations. Obviously, this framework presented today will hopefully empower you to be able to take you and your team and obviously be able to better identify, design, develop automation solutions that are robust, scalable, and efficient. And obviously with the UiPath Solution Architecture as your guide, it's my hope that obviously you guys hopefully are now more equipped now than you were about an hour ago to obviously architect success and ultimately unleash transformative potential of RPA, as well as being able to propel your organization towards a future of unparalleled productivity and growth. So guys, it has been my honor, privilege, and pleasure to have had the opportunity to hang out with everybody today. All the very best to each of you, and in the traditional spirit of UiPath, happy automation, everybody.
Thank you, Ian. Hey, I do want to throw something out there. This is really good. It's a great, foundational level for how to do this. I'm just kind of curious with the audience today if there's any topics that they would like us to do in the future based on what was presented today. If you wanted to get into more detail on any issue or roles that are associated with these areas or anything else, please just put them in chat so we can follow up on that.
A 1 hour session on each stage.
Yeah, exactly. This is, there's a lot more to each one of these areas, I know.
Yeah, to give you guys an idea, the content that a lot of this is kind of hinged and derived itself on is actually part of a much larger 2-day, all-day experience. So
right,
obviously we do go deep into each of these individual topics. So you guys got just literally the Cliff Notes version of a much larger conversation that is behind all of this. So
yeah, so if you want to hear more, please let us know.
Yep, definitely.
Thanks. So Greg, did we get all the questions?
It looks like it.
Great.
Yeah, Rick was asking, the 2-day course is a partner ILT. Yes, it is. I don't know if they've got anything outside of the partner side of the house on that offhand though. I know that there are some courses out on the Academy site though to address that question. So, and I believe if you get into that particular course, you'll probably see some of the similar graphics here that you've seen here. So definitely that'd be a good spot to start to maybe go a little bit deeper than what we concluded with here.
Yeah, this was fantastic. Any other questions from anybody? And you can open your mics. Well, it looks like we did not have enough time for sure. So we're going to have to invite you back in.
There you go. I'll be glad to do it.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Greg and Ian, for today's session. It was great.
My pleasure.
And,
Appreciate the opportunity again.
thank you, everybody, for joining today's call.
Yep. All the best, guys. Cheers.
Uh-huh.
Take care, everyone.